Welcome to the CEC Report. It's the 7th of October. I'm Robert Barwick and I'm joined today by CEC researcher and engineer Jeremy Beck. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thanks, Robbie.
In this week's CEC Report, to protect terrorists in Syria, Obama will risk World War III. And South Australia's Blackout, renewable energy experiment, a failure. But first, to protect terrorists in Syria, Obama will risk World War III. What I'm about to go through on the Syria question is documented in the CEC's weekly publication, the Australian Alert Service. And I urge everybody to call in and get a copy of this publication because Australia has a special responsibility here to take action which can avert the Syria crisis spiralling out of control into a global war. The crisis in Syria has suddenly escalated. If you watch the news, there are daily reports of Russia and Assad bombing civilians. 100 children were reportedly killed in the last week. Watch this typical news report from the BBC.
Russian and Syrian government bombs fall on rebel-held eastern Aleppo.
We know that children are being killed, children are being maimed. The use of these massive explosive weapons in such built-up urban civilian neighbourhoods will every day result in killing children. Those who are conducting these attacks must know that, and we, the United Nations, are calling that out.
Aboud al-Zayed, 7, has shrapnel lodged near his spine. Even at home, bombs still fall near. Syria and Russia drop the bombs and enforce a siege. But they blame the rebels, saying they fight in civilian areas.
We take all necessary precautions not to hit civilians. And we are taking, as I said, most strict precautions to make sure that we don't hit civilians by any chance.
أنا يحيى سكيف عمري 11 سنة وانضرب الصاروخ ما سمعت صوت ولا صوت طيارة بس إشي جرام مربطة وحدا رفعني فوق ونزلني عم يتمهلوا وصار غبرة.
If this happens, well, we are very sorry, but we need to investigate each and every accusation.
Cluster bombs, bunker busters, barrel bombs, phosphorus bombs. They've all been dropped here. 106 children have been killed in just over a week.
في ولاد كلهم مصابين مثلي أتمنى يطلع برات حلب عشان يطولع.
The Obama administration is accusing Russia and Syria of war crimes. The US is actually setting the stage to intervene in Syria, not against ISIS, but against the Assad regime on the pretext of stopping the slaughter, even though Secretary of State John Kerry admitted that a US intervention will be illegal under international law. 4 retired US generals have put to Obama various options for an intervention, including a no-fly zone, safe zones along the borders, bombing the Syrian Air Force, and supplying the rebels with surface-to-air missiles. ABC Television's Insiders host Barry Cassidy asked Australia's Foreign Minister Julie Bishop on Sunday the 2nd of October, are we anywhere near a point where the US might start bombing the Assad regime, and what would be the consequences of that? Julie Bishop replied, that would be an all-out war. It would, in fact, be the beginning of an escalation to world war. So what is the basis of war crimes, the claims of war crimes? There are a few things to note about this coverage from the BBC, which is typical of all such media coverage at the moment. 1. The focus of the coverage is on children. So any defence of the Syrian government becomes as if it's a defence of killing children. Of course, nobody would defend the killing of children, or almost nobody. To emphasise this point, look at these pictures from the Independent newspaper, which show the shocking toll of human life. As you can see, the victims include men, women, children, and the elderly. Except, I may have misled you. These images are not of victims of the Syrian and Russian governments in eastern Aleppo in 2016. They are Palestinians in Gaza in 2014, when the Israeli government launched Operation Protective Edge, a fearsome bombardment of Gaza in July and August, which, according to the United Nations, killed 2,104 Palestinians, 1,462 of whom were civilians, including 495 children and 253 women. The difference between Aleppo and Gaza is that Aleppo is a city inside Syria, which the legitimate government of Syria is trying to take back from Al-Qaeda terrorists comprised of foreign jihadists. In Gaza, Israel was launching bombs into a neighbouring, supposedly separate state. The other difference is that the US constantly stated its support for Israel's right to defend itself and fully disarm Gaza as a precondition for a ceasefire, whereas it accuses Syria and Russia in Aleppo of war crimes. Here is another example of the United States tolerating the killing of children, this time in cold blood. The man who took this famous picture in mid-August this year of the 4-year-old boy rescued from the rubble in Aleppo, which went all around the world, a few weeks earlier uploaded this selfie onto Facebook. The men he posed with are a US-backed rebel group called Zenki. In July, the very same men made headlines by videoing themselves beheading a 12-year-old Palestinian boy and uploading the video to YouTube. We're going to take a break now, and when we come back, we're going to continue on the subject of Syria. Welcome back to the CEC Report, where we're discussing to protect terrorists in Syria, Obama will risk World War III. So returning to the BBC footage, this part of the footage is provided by the group called the Syrian Civil Defence, also known as the White Helmets, which is ostensibly a force of civilian humanitarian emergency rescue workers. Virtually all of the reports about humanitarian atrocities by the Syrians and Russians come from this group, whose logo you'll see at the top of most media reports nowadays. For instance, they are the source of the claim that Russia bombed a UN aid convoy outside Aleppo on 20th of September. So who are they? To answer that question, watch this video on the White Helmets, produced by the Sydney-based group Hands Off Syria.
The White Helmets, also known as Syrian Civil Defence, claim to be an impartial, non-government organisation campaigning for Syrians. But despite the name, the White Helmets was not created by Syrians, nor does it serve Syria. Meet James the Measurer, a consultant for the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office and former British Army officer. So what is a non-Syrian British foreign policy consultant doing establishing a NGO in a foreign country? Does James really have the Syrian people's best interests at heart? If so, why do the White Helmets operate solely in terrorist-held areas? Why has the White Helmets constantly called for the implementation of a NATO-imposed no-fly zone? The same kind of no-fly zone that has destroyed Libya for decades. A no-fly zone in Syria would only benefit those who seek regime change and ultimately hurt the Syrians who are already targeted by illegal sanctions. The fact is, the White Helmets are nothing but a propaganda tool for the US and UK administrations to justify military action against the Syrian government. But the White Helmets insist on being impartial and unarmed, yet here is some footage that says otherwise.
Allah
Here's where it gets interesting. Meet Raad Saleh. He currently leads the White Helmets inside Syria. He was set to accept an award from Interaction, an alliance of international aid agencies, but was refused entry into the US due to his visa being cancelled for unknown reasons. 27th of April 2016, US Deputy Spokesperson Mark Toner was confronted by journalist Matt Lee about the White House's inconsistency regarding the White Helmets.
You commend this group, you're going to continue to support them, and yet you revoked the visa of their leader? That makes zero sense to me.
Well,
what's exactly?
And then when asked who funded and supported the White Helmets, Mark replies,
Well, I can tell you that we provide through USAID about $23 million in assistance to them.
$23 million. Wait a second. Are the White Helmets not, and I quote, fiercely independent and accepts no money from governments? So we have seen a group who is clearly not Syrian, not impartial and not independent, who are armed and are most certainly sectarian. Maybe the White Helmets were set up to facilitate executions like this one. The brave, impartial White Helmets arrive at the scene within seconds of the execution, as if they were on standby, ready to collect the body. The White Helmets. An NGO? Or simply Al-Qaeda with a facelift?
The Obama administration is using the propaganda provided by the White Helmets to accuse Russia and Syria of war crimes to create the pretext for an intervention. But here is the horrible truth. The US is intervening solely to boost Al-Qaeda. Watch this Sky UK news report from the 18th of August of how the so-called rebels in eastern Aleppo broke the siege. It reveals, through an interview with an Australian named Mustafa Mohammed, A, the rebels are united under Al-Qaeda's Syrian affiliate formerly called Al-Nusra, now called Jabhat Fatah al-Sham or JFS, and B, Al-Nusra changed its name for PR purposes to pretend it wasn't Al-Qaeda, at which point it was reinforced with weapons which we know are from the United States.
And this is some sort of progress. The strikes from the Syrian government troops, the relentless attacks on children and families, are an attempt to wrestle back control of Aleppo after opposition groups finally broke the regime's stranglehold. And these are rebel groups not including ISIS, different fighting units whose unity appears to have had a striking and immediate impact on the battlefield. In his first British television interview, a senior figure within the most powerful rebel group told us it's that collaboration which has proved a game changer.
How do you hope that this will change the situation on the ground, though?
I don't think that people really understand what the situation on the ground really is. We're talking about approximately half of a population of 23 million human beings displaced. And just to put that in a context for your viewers on Sky News, that's approximately 3 million people more than the entire population of London. We're facing arguably the biggest tragedy the 21st century has ever witnessed. And that is the situation on the ground. So, in light of all of that, to answer your question, we hope that this decision to form JFS will help unify the forces that will bring an end to all of this suffering and pain. And if you look at our success at breaking the siege in Aleppo, anyone can see how unity is definitely the major game changer in Syria.
The Front for the Liberation of Syria, or JFS, gave us these pictures. They say it shows their fighters at the heart of the battle to break the Aleppo siege.
This was the most high-level coordinated collaborations of all of the Syrian major players on the ground. Thousands of soldiers, the most experienced military commanders, all logistic efforts came together in order to foil the attempts of these four horsemen of the Syrian apocalypse: the Assad regime, Russia, Iran, and the militias of Hezbollah. Our role was integral in all fields, especially the planning and execution of military operations.
It's a dramatic turnaround for the rebel forces, and many are putting these battlefield successes down to the JFS decision to change its name from Jabhat al-Nusra and significantly cut its links with al-Qaeda. The severing of the AQ affiliation coincided with a large influx of weapons for the rebels, and that too will have tilted the balance.
What is the military plan now for Aleppo, now the siege has apparently been broken?
Well, look, Alex, the plan is very simple. The plan is to maintain this momentum until all of Aleppo is liberated.
Is this a permanent split from al-Qaeda or just a very timely one?
It's certainly not something temporary. This is a necessary step forward in order to achieve the very much needed unification of ranks in Syria. And one of the core reasons that Jabhat al-Nusra initially was disbanded and we created then JFS was to remove any potential obstacles that may impede the success of a merger, like unnecessary affiliations.
Notice that this Australian spokesman did not include ISIS among the so-called four horsemen of the Syrian apocalypse. This is who the Syrian government and Russia are fighting in Aleppo, and they are beating them, having made their greatest gains against al-Nusra since Aleppo fell in 2013. But 3 days ago, the 4th of October, Washington Post reported that the Obama administration is determined to stop Syria and Russia from winning in Aleppo. Quote, "There's an increased mood in support of kinetic actions against the regime," one senior administration official said. The CIA and the Joint Staff have said that the fall of Aleppo would undermine America's counter-terrorism goals in Syria. Australians must take stock of the fact that our presence in Syria as part of the US-led coalition is illegal under international law, and worse, that we are assisting the terrorist network that killed Australians in the World Trade Center on 9/11 and in Bali in 2002. Just as we assisted ISIS on 17th of September by helping the US to bomb Syrian soldiers. We must not tolerate this any longer. Here's what you can do. Sign the petition the CEC has started entitled "Australians Must Get Out of Syria." Sign it on the CEC website, cecos.com.au, and on change.org. Sign both versions because they will be used for different purposes. Call in and get a copy of this week's alert service and the United Kingdom's Parliament's Libya report, which shows the same lies being used against Syria were used against Libya in 2011. Get involved in the CEC's mobilisation, because if we can force Australia to withdraw from Syria, we can stop World War III. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Finally, South Australia's Blackout renewable energy experiment is a failure. So, big news, the entire state of South Australia last week suffered a blackout, which is unprecedented. Other states such as Queensland, Jeremy, have constantly suffered much bigger storms, but they've never had a statewide blackout, right? And I think you've got a picture of that. We've been building towards this crisis for a while. And what I want you to do is explain that there's a huge debate about this, what caused the blackout, what didn't. I have a quote though I wanted that you put in your article from Jay Weatherall, the Premier of South Australia, in December 2015. While he was in Paris, he declared his state government's renewable energy policy, quote, "We are running a big international experiment right now." So because of the blackout, the renewable energy component of South Australia has been criticised. And the defenders of it have been very unhappy about that. So you've investigated it. What's your conclusion?
The storm was one factor, but if South Australia had sufficient infrastructure, they would not have had a statewide blackout. And you have a look at the map of the cyclones that Queensland has had. They've covered all over the place, all the time, numerous cyclones, very intense cyclones. And at times...
Much bigger winds, 100, 200 kilometre an hour winds. South Australia's got to barely 100.
At times, 100, 200,000 houses have been blacked out, but not millions.
Yeah.
This is a crime against South Australia, investing in this very expensive energy. Wind power is very expensive. very unreliable. Also, wind power and solar is what we call asynchronous, that it doesn't have this regular pulse that you can get out of your gas or your coal or your nuclear fired, all those base load stations produce a regular pulse, and in Australia we use a 50, 60 hertz power. In the United States it's 60, Australia's 50 hertz, and that has to be kept exactly at that frequency.
And wind messes with that.
Yeah, wind does mess with that. And when you look at it, and I've got this report here from the Australian Energy Market Operator, and this is only just released on the 5th of October, and they said in the events leading up to South Australia's Region Black system, generation reduction occurred at 6 wind farms. There was no reduction in thermal generation. That's the gas-fired power stations.
So the wind failed, but the proper power stations didn't.
And the gas-fired power stations failed at the very last fraction of a second after the problems with the wind and the problems of the storm knocking over the power lines. In fact, one of the major power lines was knocked over after the blackout. So there's more than enough evidence. And if you have a look at the graph here,
this gives the chronology, doesn't it?
Yeah, this is the wind energy production during the 28th of September blackout, and you notice there's a ramping up of power, and it was up and down all over the place. Jumping up and down by more than 100 megawatts of power, and right at the last minute you see a big drop off there. Wind power cannot run in a storm, in a gale. They have to shut down the whole turbine, so you get these sudden stoppages which causes a lot of disturbances in the system.
Yep.
And a lot of these wind farms stopped well before the last moment, when the interconnector, which feeds power from Victoria, that dropped out because all the wind power dropped out before.
And most of that happened before the towers came down, right?
Yeah,
the transmission towers.
A lot of the wind couldn't cope with this high speed gales, which they have to shut down all the time. This is what they do. So
I think most viewers wouldn't appreciate that. You've got a finely tuned system at 50 hertz, and those fluctuations you're seeing there, that just wreaks absolute havoc with the system.
It certainly does. And if they had several coal-fired power plants or nuclear-fired, it doesn't matter, thermal baseload power in several locations, they would not have had a blackout, along with the necessary distribution infrastructure.
And this is an important subject, thanks Jeremy, because if you want a modern industrial economy, real wealth comes from what we can produce, and energy should be the main is really the main component of real wealth. And South Australia, through its ideology, is impoverishing itself, but the whole country is going that way, and the whole Western world is going that way. And it's going to have huge consequences for the functionality of our economy to be able to produce stuff if we keep going down this path. Jeremy, thank you very much. So that's it for this week's CEC report. Call in, like I said, you can get reports on both subjects, including the South Australia thing and this week's alert service, but join our mobilisation. We have to avert this crisis, and we in Australia have a unique responsibility. Thanks for tuning in.